What is up, my fellow Shield Brothers? It's the Shield Brother here, and
the Sword Brother.
Finally here to join me with the History Armada. He's gonna finally be joining this channel. It's been a long time coming, and I'm really glad to have you here.
Glad to be here.
So, today, on this weekly dose of history, we're gonna be talking about the U.S. Constitution and how on June 21st, it came into effect. So, on this day in 1788, New Hampshire became the 9th and final state needed of the original 13 to ratify the new U.S. Constitution. And at this pivotal point, the Constitution became the organic law of the land.
This newly adopted Constitution created a stronger federal government under a system of checks and balances. It placed the duties of Congress under Article 1 ahead of those of the presidency under Article 2.
Which was a fact that had been kind of argued upon due to George Washington not necessarily knowing where he wanted the powers to lie. So, the Articles of Confederation served as the written document that established the functions of the national government of the United States, after it declared independence from Great Britain. It established a very weak central government that mostly, but not entirely, prevented the individual states from conducting their own foreign policies and diplomacy.
The Albany Plan, which was an earlier version of this form of government, pre-independence, attempted at joining the colonies into a larger union, but it failed in part because of the individual colonies were concerned about losing power to another central institution. As the American Revolution gained momentum, however, many political leaders saw the advantages of a centralized government that could coordinate the Revolutionary War. In June of 1775, the New York Provincial Congress sent a plan of union to the Continental Congress, which, like the Albany Plan, continued to recognize the authority of the British Crown.
Because, see, the Albany Plan was kind of, the blueprint. It was the first steps that they took there, like, hey, independently, we're strong, but we're not strong enough. We kind of need each other, but at the same time, they didn't want to lose their own autonomy. So, some Continental Congress delegates had also informally discussed plans for a more permanent union than the Continental Congress, whose status was temporary. Benjamin Franklin had drawn up a plan for Articles of Confederation and Perpetual Union. While some delegates, such as Thomas Jefferson, supported Franklin's proposal, many others were strongly opposed to this. Franklin introduced the plan before Congress on July 21st, but stated that it should be viewed as a draft for when Congress was interested in reaching a more formal proposal. Congress tabled the entire plan. Instead of taking his word as a draft, they just used it.
Following the Declaration of Independence, the members of the Continental Congress realized it would be necessary to set up a national government. Congress began to discuss the form this government would take on July 22nd, disagreeing on a number of issues, including whether representation and voting would be proportional or state by state.
That's where the feds and the anti-feds kind of come into play.
The disagreements delayed final discussions of Confederation until October of 1777. By then, the British capture of Philadelphia had made the issue more urgent. Delegates finally formulated the Articles of Confederation, in which they argued to state-by-state voting and proportional state tax burdens based on land values, though they left the issue of state claims to western lands unresolved. Congress sent the Articles to the states for ratification at the end of November. Most delegates realized that the Articles were a flawed compromise, but believed that it was better than an absence of formal national government.
Because these Articles of Confederation, while they kind of outlined what a central government could do, didn't actually give it any power to actually do anything. The states still had a lot more power than the central government, meaning that the central government couldn't tax, couldn't have tariffs, couldn't even raise a militia if needed, because the states were all printing their own currency, had their own militias, and were acting on their own accord. In 1787, when asked about his opinion of the Philadelphia constitutional proceedings happening in secret, Patrick Henry famously replied, "I smell a rat." Henry opposed the proposed constitution because he feared it would centralize power in a strong national government. This put Henry at odds with the Federalists, who viewed the existing Articles of Confederation as an insufficient yoke to bind the several states into a more perfect union. But Henry was not alone in his opposition. Many throughout the newly independent states shared his fears. Collectively, they came to be known as anti-federalists, and New Hampshire had a strong contingent. Because, I mean, let's be fair, they had just gotten out of the yoke of the British, there was tyrants, they were like, I don't want to give all these guys new power to do that again. I mean, gee.
Federalists recognized the weakness of their position, as fierce debates about the Constitution had been occurring since its October 1787 debut in Portsmouth. The pro-centralization powers, however, had an ace in the hole. They controlled state planning for the upcoming convention to decide whether New Hampshire would ratify the document. With that, Seacoast resident John Sullivan, who also happened to be president of New Hampshire, or, well, governor, schemed to call a special legislative session in December rather than wait for the regularly scheduled meeting set for late January. He did this to catch the opposition by surprise and increase the likelihood that Federalists could control the outcome.
Which they did, and they did. The Federalists were able to set the ratifying convention for February, by which time they hoped Massachusetts and other states would have ratified it. They also were able to set aside for the convention the state's exclusion bill. The bill prohibited state officials from simultaneously representing their towns in the legislature. By setting it aside, Sullivan's side allowed the participation of influential Federalists like Superior Court Chief Justice Samuel Livermore of Grafton County and State Treasurer John Taylor Gilman from intervening and acting upon this. It was their way to kind of set up a barrier from keeping it from happening.
New Hampshire's lawmakers divided 57 to 47 over ratification. Once the Congress of the Confederation received word of the vote, it set a timetable for the start of operations under the new Constitution. On March 4th, 1789, the revised federal structure went into force.
4 smaller states, including Delaware, New Jersey, Georgia, and Connecticut, had quickly assembled their respective state conventions and already ratified the document.
Pennsylvania was the first big win for the Federalists, yet it was not a sure bet. Anti-Federalists held enough sway in the state assembly to prevent a vote for calling a ratifying convention. Finally, the Anti-Federalists were literally dragged to the State House, and a vote was cast on December 12, 1787, as they pounded on the doors to escape.
The Anti-Federalists soon began trying to stem the tide of the remaining state conventions, concentrating on New York, Massachusetts, and Virginia states where they retained wide support. However, as we stated earlier, New Hampshire won 57-47 on this day, and therefore the Constitution was ratified. So, thank you so much for watching. I hope you learned something about American history. I hope you learned a little something about the Constitution. This is the Shield Brother and the Sword Brother, and we're going to be duoing the History Armada now. And anything you want to tell the people?
Ta-ta for now.
Thanks for watching, y'all, and we'll catch y'all next time.